Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rebecca Keppel. In today's video, we're going to talk about 3 different ways to use dies to emboss rather than to die cut. In one of my last videos, I talked about using dies to create stencils, and someone commented that she'd like to use those stencils to emboss. And the more I thought about it, I realized we don't have to use the stencils we made, we can just use the dies themselves. So please keep leaving those comments and questions and ideas for videos you'd like to see. This video is part of my Support Small Card Making Businesses series. I will link to that playlist up here if you want to check the whole thing out. Today I'm using all stamps and dies from one of my favorites, Waffle Flower Crafts. The die cut machine that I'm using for my embossing is the Gemini Junior. For the first couple of cards I used the rubber embossing mat that Gemini Junior sells as an accessory, and I used the instructions that they have in their manual. But I found that the pressure from the Gemini Junior machine was so good and so even that it actually cut even when it was supposed to just emboss. So hang out till the middle of the video to find out how I got around that and the little hack that I used. All right, let's jump right in and emboss a background with a panel die. This is the rubber embossing mat from Crafter's Companion, sold for the use with the Gemini Junior. It's definitely thinner than the magnetic shim. The sandwich they recommend is to use a clear cutting plate on the bottom, then the plastic shim, then the die with the cutting side face up. I'm using Waffle Flower's Stars Panel die. Then your paper, then the rubber embossing mat, then a top clear cutting plate. You can see the impression is very deep, which is great because it's clear, but you can also see that some of the lines cut all the way through. To create my card, I trimmed the panel down so I could mat it on blue cardstock. You can see when I ran the tape runner over the back of the stars, one of the stars disconnected from the panel because it had been cut out completely rather than just embossed. I placed adhesive on the back of the rest of the stars so they would stay in place. I'm using the Pink & Main ergonomic blending brush to achieve a light blend of tumbled glass distress oxide on top of my stars. To line up my sentiment inside a stitched circle die cut, I'm placing the die on the pattern paper inside the MISTI and then centering my stamp inside the die. I'll remove the die so I get a good stamped impression. I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx ink because the pigment ink lays on top of the paper and shows up great on pattern paper. Once my image is dark and clear, I'll put the die back down in the MISTI where I had used the corner of the MISTI to line it up, then apply Thermoweb purple tape to hold it in place and run it through my Gemini Junior. I die cut the star panel out of silver glitter cardstock, and I'm adhering the little stars to every other star on the embossed panel. A tiny dot of Thermoweb's Ultra Bond liquid adhesive holds them in place. The longer dry time of this adhesive gives me plenty of time to line up the die cut stars over the embossed ones. I added some foam tape to the back of my sentiment circle and adhered it to my card. The ink blending really helps those embossed stars stand out. Now let me share with you the little hack that I found to emboss with a panel die that doesn't cut through the paper. So this time I'm using a clear cutting plate on the bottom, the plastic shim, the Waffle Flower Sunshine panel die, the paper I want to emboss, and then instead of the rubber embossing mat, I'm using a piece of cardstock. I used 110-pound cardstock for my card and 80-pound cardstock for the shim. Then I placed my top cutting plate on it and run it through my Gemini Junior. If you have a manual die cut machine, you'll just have to play around with whether the rubber mat works for you or whether or not you need to use a shim. For this card, I'm using the Gina K Masking Magic, which I'm going to die cut with the same panel die we embossed. I popped all the pieces out and tried to keep them in order, then removed the protective backing from the main die cut piece, and I'm placing that die cut mask right on top of the embossed background. Then I take all of the little die cut mask pieces and place them like puzzle pieces into the embossed panel. This was definitely time consuming, I admit, but I had a vision for the outcome, so it was worth the extra time and patience it required. I kept these two rays open with no masks adhered to them, and I'm ink blending these two with pink Distress Oxides. Then I place those two masks on top of the blended pink rays and remove the next two masks to blend them with two orange colors of Distress Oxide. I continue along around the panel using all the colors of the rainbow. I love the embossed inked rainbow rays when it was all done. I'm going to stamp my sentiment with a stamp from the Waffle Flower Sweet Sentiments stamp set. The center sun area fits many sentiments beautifully. Once that was done, I'm going to add some clear droplet embellishments. This Clearly Enough embellishment set from Waffle Flower has medium and small self-adhesive clear droplets, and I use them all the time. Like I said, all the masking was a bit of a labor of love, but I really love how this one turned out. Next, let's use nesting dies to create a fun embossed background look. I created this next card before I figured out my paper shim hack, so you'll see me use the rubber embossing mat here again. I'm using Waffle Flower's nesting hexagon dies and placing them inside each other on some pattern paper. Once I have them all lined up, I adhere them with purple tape to keep them in place and flip the whole thing over and cover it with the rubber embossing mat, then cover that with a cutting plate and run it through my Gemini Junior. You can see where some of the hexagons cut a bit rather than just embossed. Using Pink & Main's mini ergonomic blending brush, I ink blended on top of the embossed hexagons and on the edges of the pattern paper that I'm going to mat my panel on. I'm heat embossing a sentiment with the classic sentiment stamp set, and I cut it out with the classic Sprigs Die and popped it all up on some foam adhesive. This time I'm using the unicorn enamel dots and end up with a clean and simple design. Here's another version of using nesting dies to create that embossed background look, but I'm going to use my hack this time so that I don't cut through the paper. For this card, I'm using Waffle Flower's Nesting Circles die. It looks like when I started to line them up that I've misplaced a few, so I decided to create a spiral look by having them concentrated in one corner. Again, I adhere them together with purple tape and run them through the Gemini Junior, this time using my paper shim rather than the embossing mat. The embossed effect does turn out to be lighter, I think because I didn't use 110-pound paper this time, but it didn't cut through, so I consider that a win. I die cut my embossed circle with a slightly larger circle die from the same die set. Next, I die cut out leaves from the Waffle Flower Sprigs Die out of two of other Waffle Flower pattern papers from the Half Lines collection. Working on my Waffle Flower mini media mat, which is perfect for ink blending, I'm using cracked pistachio on the circle. I brushed some of the color off with a microfiber towel because I wanted the center to be the lightest point. Now I'm inking the edges of the die-cut sprigs with pine needles. This step is totally not necessary, but I feel like it makes those little leaves really pop. I'm peeling off the back of some Thermoweb iCraft Easy Cut adhesive and laying it on some white cardstock so I can place this tiny sentiment on the cardstock side and turn the letters into stickers. I'm cutting around the negative of the letters to create a template to help me line them up on the place where I want them on my little craft sign. Then it's as easy as peel and stick with that iCraft Easy Cut adhesive and pop them into the open letters of my template. Then I pop up the craft sign with some dimensional adhesive. I'm going to adhere a couple of sprigs around the sign as well. The larger leaves have enough space to hide some dimensional adhesive behind them. For the skinnier leaves, I use liquid adhesive on the stems and lower leaves. Once that's dry, I can kind of fold up the outer leaves slightly to create a little bit more dimension. Last but not least, some enamel dots, of course, to complete the card. You know how much I love my enamel dots. There's one more type of dies that I tend to own a lot of, and that is matching dies. So dies that are made to cut out the images of stamp sets. Let me share how I use that to create an embossed stamped image. For this final card, I'm using Waffle Flowers Blossoms stamp set. I want to center the image, so I'm centering my A2 card panel in my Mini Misty and centering the stamp on top of that. When I closed the door of the Misty, it picked up the stamp and the paper, so I placed a little bit of tape runner on the back of the paper and then repositioned it in the center of my Mini Misty. That will keep it in place on the Mini Misty so that it won't move around and it will stay in the center. I inked up the stamp with Distress Oxide Blueprint Sketch and stamped it a couple of times to get all those details. It's a big stamp and it needs a bunch of pressure, but you don't want to press so hard that you smear the ink. So you definitely just want to do it a couple of times gently and maybe rub, press in a couple of places where you're missing your details. Then I temporarily adhered the matching die outside the stamped image with purple tape and ran it through my Gemini Junior with a paper shim rather than the rubber mat. And you can see how you get a really pretty embossed outline without cutting the image out. I treated my panel with anti-static powder and then stamped a sentiment from the same stamp set with Versamark ink. I poured on gold embossing powder and then heat set it. Next, I cut down the panel and matted it onto gold foil cardstock and added some clear enamel dots to finish it all off. Whether you're using panel dies, nesting dies, or matching dies to create embossed looks, this technique really opens up a whole other facet of using your dies, which I love because that means you're getting more bang for your buck. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't yet, and hit the bell so you can be notified when any of my new videos are available. I want to thank you so much for all the comments. Again, they give me great video ideas, so keep them coming. If you're interested in the supplies that I use, they'll all be linked down below in the YouTube description box. As always, thank you so much for spending time with me. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. Fun to use them. I feel like the king in Hamilton. Spitting. Forgot where I was going. Finally got it down, but now I forgot where I was going.